Why was one of Putin's closest allies in Kyiv? Why has the active front line expanded recently? And will this year's NATO summit be as disappointing as last year's? This is week 123 of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. I'm Anna Belokur, reporting to you from Kyiv, and I'll be taking you through the top 3 stories this week in Ukraine. Russian forces have continued to advance at a steep pace in multiple sectors of the front line in the east. According to the crowdsourced Deep State Monitoring Service, Russia has made gains in the direction of Toretsk, Pokrovsk, Krasnohorivka, New York, Chasiv Yar, and other areas. Commander-in-Chief Alexander Syrskyi said that the active front line has recently expanded in Donetsk Oblast, and fighting is particularly intense near Toretsk. The military confirmed on July 4th that Ukrainian troops have withdrawn from the canal neighborhood of Chasiv Yar, as their positions have been destroyed after months of defense. Chasiv Yar is a strategically important city. It's located on relatively high ground and can open access to 4 major cities in Donetsk Oblast. Russian forces have been making slow, grinding advances in the east since the fall of Avdiivka in February, taking advantage of Ukraine's ammunition shortage and heavily relying on its own endless resources of personnel and firepower. Their offensive actions have intensified further in Donetsk Oblast as they opened a new front in Kharkiv Oblast, which was largely seen as a distraction aimed at stretching Ukrainian forces thin. Syrskyi said that the key current problem for Ukrainian commanders is manning units with motivated, well-trained military. Ukraine has ramped up the mobilization of new soldiers as manpower shortages are felt across the front line. But it's not just a lack of soldiers contributing to the situation. Western aid and weapons that have already been approved are slow to arrive in Ukraine, leaving 14 brigades under-resourced as they try to hold the line, according to President Volodymyr Zelensky. In a recent interview with Bloomberg, Zelensky reiterated that Ukraine is immensely grateful to America for their assistance, but that delays in delivering the aid packages are costing Ukraine lives and territory. On July 2nd, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban made his first visit to Kyiv since the start of the full-scale invasion. Orban has long been one of Europe's most outwardly pro-Russian leaders and a close ally of Vladimir Putin. He's also been consistently outspoken against the prospect of Ukraine joining both NATO and the EU. During the visit, Orban encouraged President Zelensky to consider a ceasefire with the goal of speeding up peace negotiations between Ukraine and Russia. In this scenario, the conflict would be temporarily frozen along current battle lines while Ukraine and Russia work out an agreement, or risk resume fighting. Although both Orban and Zelensky praised the meeting as a productive and important step for the two countries in building future cooperation, Zelensky declined the prospect of a ceasefire, as he's done in the past. As of now, there's nothing to suggest that Russia and Ukraine will be able to reconcile their terms for peace through negotiations, and Kyiv believes that a pause in fighting would simply give Russia time to rest and move more equipment onto occupied land, giving them the upper hand before fighting commences again. Zelensky commented afterwards that any future peace negotiations with Russia can only occur through an official mediation platform, and only after a plan for the talks has been agreed on by all sides. This means assembling a cohort of international diplomats who are committed to finding a solution that doesn't violate Ukraine's territorial integrity and ensures that fair protocol and monitoring can be applied to both the talks and any agreements that come out of them. Russia and Ukraine attempted to hold talks in the early days of the full-scale invasion, but they ended in May 2022 after it was decided that there was no way to reconcile the two countries' objectives. No negotiations have been successfully held since. As someone who was in Kyiv on Tuesday, it's notable that the air raid siren went off nearly constantly, far more than average, during Orban's visit. This didn't deter the Prime Minister from making a surprise trip to Moscow 2 days later, on July 5th, a move that angered many in Europe, given that Hungary has just acquired the rotating presidency of the Council of the European Union. Top EU officials like Ursula von der Leyen and Joseph Borrell condemned the visit, stating that Orban was in no way representing the European Union in his dealings with Putin. The 75th annual NATO summit will be held this week in Washington, D.C. The summit will focus on deterrence and defense, as well as celebrating 75 years of the alliance. It's hard to imagine how these vibes will be mixed, and to what result. Last year's summit in Vilnius was something of a disappointment for Ukraine, which had hoped to receive a guarantee that its membership would one day be approved. NATO made assurances regarding aid to Ukraine, but declined to offer an official invitation for membership, despite Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg saying that Ukraine had a clear path to membership and would become a member of NATO. 1 year later, it's even harder to get a firm answer on whether current NATO members truly believe that Ukraine will one day be part of the alliance. Zelensky said this week that the US doesn't see Ukraine as a NATO state and is acting accordingly. And while Stoltenberg said that he hopes Ukraine will join NATO, he specified within the next 10 years. Although leaders and diplomats across allied countries continue to refer to Ukraine's accession as inevitable, it still remains unclear how and under what circumstances this might happen, particularly as NATO membership is expected to be one of the key bargaining chips in any potential peace talks between Ukraine and Russia. NATO also announced this week that it will be opening a new post in Kyiv, which is said to be a preemptive measure for ensuring that allies will still be able to provide aid to Ukraine, no matter who is elected president of the United States. And yes, they were pretty explicit about what they mean here. The post has been referred to as Trump-proof. That's all for this week. We'll be back next Sunday with more news from Ukraine. Your support is what makes our work possible. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to this channel. If you'd like to become a member of the Kyiv Independent community, please visit the link in the description below. I'll see you next week.